Welcome to the Great Two-Star listed Church of England Parish Church of St Alban the Martyr, here on the corner of Stanhope Street and Conybeare Street in Highgate, Birmingham. Today the church is surrounded by scaffolding because, worn out after 140 years, the tiled roof is being renewed thanks to a major grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Built in the Victorian Gothic style of red brick with bathstone dressings, the design of architect John Loughborough Pearson, the church opened in 1881. It replaced a smaller church of St Alban that stood nearby on the corner of Leopold Street and Dimmock Street. There, in 1865, James Pollock, assisted by his brother Thomas, began St Alban's mission in a simple building that served as mission church on Sunday and day school on weekdays. Just as this church is a descendant of their mission chapel, so too, over there, is Ark St Alban's Academy, the descendant of their school. The 5-metre high granite Celtic cross on the corner of Conybeare Street and Stanhope Street was erected in 1898 as a memorial to the two brothers born in the Isle of Man to Irish parents who were inspired by the Oxford movement to devote their lives to working in what was then, and is now, an area of high social deprivation, bringing both Christian ministry and education to a rapidly expanding suburb of poor housing and factories. Now called Highgate, this was then on the edge of Birmingham and known as Vorton's Hole. John Pearson's design included a tall tower with a steeple, but only the lowest story was completed. Even without the tower, it took until 1891 to pay off the debt for the building, with generous help from supporters living in wealthier districts. In 1938, a member of the congregation paid for the addition of the present tower. Although built in the same material of red brick with bathstone dressings, the saddleback design by local architect E.F. Reynolds is radically different from the original plan. Apart from the addition of the tower, from the street the church looks much as it did at the end of the 19th century. However, the surroundings are much altered since the demolition of the crowded terrace and back-to-back courtyard housing in the 1950s and 60s. Let me now welcome you into the west porch of St Alban's Church. This large crucifix in the west porch, or narthex, once hung above the chancel of St Mary's, Aston Brook. It is attributed to the Birmingham architect William Bidlake, architect of St Agatha's Sparkbrook. When St Mary's was demolished to make way for redevelopment around the Aston Expressway in 1972, the crucifix was rescued and installed here. In its forlorn, unrestored state, showing the scars of vandalism, it stands both as a witness to its own sad history and as an image of the hurt of the world. Now we are viewing the nave from the gallery. From here we can see the full beauty of the cathedral-like interior. It's also reputed to be one of the best acoustics in Britain, and you will have noticed the change in the timbre of my voice. Pearson, the architect, created his own personal style of Gothic by fusing into it the essentially classical concept of the golden section. In St Albans, the golden section ratio of 1 to 1.6 is used in the plan of the nave bays and in the height and width of the clerestory. Nave, chancel and transepts are stone vaulted at the same height of 50 feet, which is just over 15 metres. The chancel arch is only a little lower than the groined roof, just sufficient to mark the separation, but not interfering with the vista. The apparent height is enhanced by shafts running from the base of the pillars to the springing of the roof arches. The wrought iron chancel screen above a stone barrier was completed in 1897 to the original design. It separates the choir and sanctuary from the body of the church without concealing anything. The carved rood beam above, with figures of St Mary and the Apostle St John on either side of the crucifix, was only erected here in 1967. It is one of several items that came from our nearby daughter church of St Patrick's, Frank Street. St Patrick's was built because of the success of the Pollock's mission and the rapid growth in population of Highgate. The first St Patrick's mission opened on Highgate Street, followed in 1896 by a permanent church on Frank Street, also designed by John Loughborough Pearson. St Patrick's was demolished in 1966 when the Middleway Ring Road was constructed, and the parishes were reunited in 1973. The rood beam was carved in 1913 by Nathaniel Hitch, a well-known ecclesiastical sculptor, to the design of Frank Loughborough Pearson, who followed his father as supervising architects to both churches. Below the cross, there is a carving of the medieval myth of a pelican in her piety. She has stabbed her own breast with her beak so that her blood can feed or revive, according to different versions of the legend, her chicks in the nest beneath her. Because of this legend, the pelican was used as a symbol of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. There are several more depictions of the pelican in different places around this church. Back on the ground floor, we're going to walk up the south aisle where there are 3 stained glass windows. The first 2 are of St Thomas Becket and St James of Nisibis. They came from St Patrick's Church, where there were memorials to James and Thomas Pollock. They were installed here in 1983 as a memorial to Canon Lawrence Goodrich Harding, vicar from 1953 until his death in 1981. Moving on, we pass the statue shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham, indicating the church's long connection with the shrine in Norfolk. Next we see the great brass eagle lectern with 4 copper roundels in the base depicting the emblems of the 4 evangelists, which dates from 1891. It was paid for by many gifts of small change from the children of the Sunday school over several years. One of them is recorded as saying 20 years later, while cleaning the lectern, "Many a ha'porth of sweets I've gone without for the sake of this here lectern." The third window in this aisle shows the Virgin Mary holding a rather adult-looking infant Jesus with very pre-Raphaelite faces. It dates from 1909 and is a late product of the workshop of Morris & Co. Moving on to the south transept from the south aisle, there is an altar dedicated in honour of our patron saint, St Alban, the first Christian martyr in England. The statue was given in 1917. Moving further east, we come to the Sacrament Chapel, also known as St. Patrick's Chapel, where the Blessed Sacrament started being reserved in 1911. In honour of this, the handsome brass and iron gates, designed by John Goodman, a well-known local architect and church warden of this church, were given in 1914 in memory of Harriet Keep, a former secretary of the Confraternity of the Blessed Sacrament. Further enrichment of the chapel followed in 1938, with the ornate tabernacle on the altar to hold the sacrament, and copper panel behind supporting the fine arts and crafts altarpiece or reredos. The tabernacle and panel were commissioned from the Birmingham firm of A.E. Jones and Company and are decorated with a series of enamel plaques showing the instruments of the Passion. The reredos above consists of 5 panels painted in egg tempera by prominent Birmingham artist Kate Elizabeth Bunce. They are set in a hinged copper triptych frame made by her sister Myra Louisa, known both for her own paintings and her hand-beaten metal picture frames. Both sisters were members of the Birmingham School of Art. A Civic Society blue plaque outside the church commemorates Kate. In November 1909, the parish magazine recorded the promise of this reredos for St. Patrick's Chapel by the sisters in memory of their father John Thackeray Bunce, who was for many years the influential editor of the Birmingham Post. The central panel was exhibited in 1913, but the work was not completed and presented until 1919. It was initially placed not in this chapel, but on the altar of the Lady Chapel on the other side of the church, probably moving to its present position in 1938. The central panel of this altarpiece shows the Virgin Mary surrounded by angels. The outer panels depict St. Patrick on the left and St. Alban on the right. Looking closely at the panels reveals many different British birds, all correctly represented. This detail from the left panel shows a snake, toad, lizard and mouse by St. Patrick's mitre, as well as their father, John Thackeray Bunce. This plaque on the back of the right panel commemorates their mother Rebecca, their sister Edith, and Myra herself, who died in November 1918. Here in the roof of the chapel, a stone boss depicts another pelican, incorporated here by the architect as an integral part of the church. There is a third pelican in the copperwork roundel of the reredos at the top right of the centre panel, placed there by Myra Bunce. The Victorian window above the altar portrays scenes from the life of St. Patrick. The south window, given by James and Tom Pollock in memory of their father, Major Samuel Pollock, who fought in the Peninsular War against Napoleon, depicts biblical events with a military connection. This window is the work of the firm Clayton and Bell. This firm also made the series of single light windows depicting British saints in this chapel and around the ambulatory walkway behind the high altar. The statue of St. Patrick, originally in St. Patrick's Church, Frank Street, dates from 1921. Moving into the chancel, we pass the banner of St. Patrick. This also comes from St. Patrick's Church. The figure of St. Patrick is worked using a revival of the medieval ornoué technique of shaded silk threads over gold wire, and the banner dates from around 1914. On the opposite side of the chancel hangs our banner of St. Alban. The figure of St Alban is from the original banner made for the opening of St Alban's mission in 1865. It has been much repaired and has been remounted on a fresh banner several times over the years. The high altar is the one originally provided for the 1865 mission chapel, moved in 1871 to the next church, and then in 1881 to this church. On it stands a second tabernacle. 6 great brass arts and crafts candlesticks stand on the gradine or shelf behind the altar. They were designed by Arthur Stansfield Dixon, founder of the Birmingham Guild of Handicraft and warden of this church. They were made by the Guild in 1903. 2 smaller candlesticks and a cross on the altar of St Alban were also the work of the Birmingham Guild. Behind the altar we can see a Victorian window depicting the crucifixion, a neat device to place a crucifix above the altar at a time when only plain crosses were used in the Church of England. Above the altar are 3 more recent windows with richly coloured stained glass. The central window, by Birmingham artist Henry Payne, dates from 1904, and the flanking pair, in similar style, by local artist Sidney Maitillard, were installed in 1927. Moving out of the chancel, past the organ, we come to a wrought iron screen that separates the Lady Chapel from the north aisle. This screen came from the Blessed Sacrament Chapel of St Patrick's Church and was made by the Bromsgrove Guild in about 1913. It was installed here in 1966. It still bears a shield with an emblem of St Patrick with a bishop's staff and a snake and the initial S and P. The statue of Our Lady, carved in oak, was given around 1910 by Father George David Rosenthal, then curate at St Albans, but later well known as the vicar of St Agatha's Sparkbrook. It was paid for in part by the proceeds of a dancing class that he ran for the young people of the parish. The fine embroidery on the frontal of the Lady Chapel altar is the work of the Wareham Guild, dating to 1925, but the red and blue fabric on which it is mounted has been renewed in the original colours, paid for by our friends of St Albans and St Patrick's. This window is another made by Clayton and Bell. It was given by James and Thomas Pollock in memory of their elder sister Anna, who lived with them in Birmingham after the sale of their family home in the Isle of Man. Some of the scenes in the window show women named Anne, Anna, or Hannah. The latter is a Hebrew name from which Anne and Anna derive. However, the central scenes relate to the massacre of the Holy Innocents, when King Herod had the young children of Bethlehem slaughtered in the hope of killing the infant Jesus. This part of the window is a memorial to 4 of the Pollock sisters and 1 of their brothers, all of whom died of fever on the Isle of Man between October 1831 and January 1832. This was before James and Thomas were born, in 1834 and 1836. It is said that their mother vowed that if she had another male child, he would be given to God and trained for the priesthood. James was the next child and fulfilled this vow. This is all reflected in the design of the window, where we see the souls of children as 5 winged heads being welcomed into heaven by Jesus, who is in the form of a child. Moving down the north aisle, we come to the first of 14 carved wooden stations of the cross. These run down this aisle and continue up the south aisle. These illustrations of the suffering or passion of Jesus take us from his condemnation by Pilate in this first station to his burial in the last. During Lent, we have a short service of stations in which we move from station to station with prayers and a short meditation on each picture. The stations were carved to order from 1914 to 1919 and given as memorials or thank offerings. Many of the stations have interesting details added to the basic scene. In this first station, as well as Pilate washing his hands, we see his wife behind him, who has advised him to have nothing to do with Jesus because she has been troubled in a dream about him. In the background, there is a little angel over the shoulder of Jesus. This minute detail was still carefully carved, although it is easily overlooked. We will now return to the west end of the nave. The rose window in the west wall of the church has a diameter of 16 feet, nearly 5 meters. Originally in plain glass, the colour glass was added in 1957. With the 5 tall lancets below, it provides abundant natural light from the west in the early evening. The gallery below the windows can seat 90 people, although it is not open to the public because neither the steep spiral stair to reach it nor the low balustrade at the front meets modern safety standards. The pillars supporting the stone vaulting beneath the gallery form a baptistry between the 2 doors to the west porch. Our red marble font stands here. The position of the font here, near the main entrance of the church, symbolizes that it is through the sacrament of baptism that new members enter the Christian community. The mural behind the font was painted in 1896 by the firm of Clayton and Bell to the detailed instruction of James Pollock. Like the ecolectern, both the font and this wall painting were paid for by the small donations of the Sunday school children. We hope that you have enjoyed this virtual tour of the Church of St. Alban the Martyr, Highgate, Birmingham. Once we are able to hold open days again, we hope you will visit our church if you are in Birmingham. In the meantime, you can find more information about this church and the history of the parish on our website at www.stalban.co.uk. This link is in the description below the video. This video has been prepared as part of our project Revealing St. Alban's Hidden Heritage, supported by a grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund.